In relating to the tale of the Grand Inquisitor, it's important to know that Dostoevsky by this time had become a very strong supporter of the Tsarist regime, so strong, as a matter of fact, that there were many people in the regime who became very much interested in him, most especially one man by the name, for most Americans unpronounceable, Pobedonostsev. Pobedonostsev was a very clever conservative, if not reactionary, who realized well the talent of Dostoevsky and was very much interested in helping him where he could, even arranged an interview with the Tsar himself, between Dostoevsky and the Tsar himself. Dostoevsky was in the habit of sometimes giving him copies of the manuscripts of his novel that he was working on. When Pobedonostsev received the manuscript of the Grand Inquisitor, the tale of the Grand Inquisitor, he became very worried. He said, "Look, I thought you were on our side. This seems to be an argument for atheism. Have you gone over to the other side? Do you really think that what you've written here helps the regime and helps the cause of conservatism, which you yourself seem to want to support?" And Dostoevsky replied this way. He said, "Look, I wanted to show those so-called atheists," talking about his critics and about many of the intellectuals of his day, "I wanted to show those so-called atheists that with my little finger, I could make a better argument for atheism than they could do with their entire head." And of course, this seems to indicate that the thing is indeed an argument for atheism, although one might argue about that. But, he said, the whole rest of the novel is a reply to this. The whole rest of the novel is an attempt to, not only attempt to show, but will show that these problems can be solved, that as a matter of fact there is an answer, and this answer is to be found in the kind of salvation that I consider Christianity to be. And of course, Dostoevsky follows this up clearly with the section of the novel that has to do with Father Zosima, the teachings of Father Zosima. And as we read this section, we begin to realize that what Dostoevsky is doing is creating a new gospel for, of course, in his case, the 19th century, but clearly the 20th century, and perhaps for the 21st century as well. The gospel, of course, is an account of the life and teachings of Christ. This particular section is an account of the life and teaching of Zosima. It seems that Zosima, when he was a young man, was a very different kind of a person than he was now. He was one of those saints who sinned his way to Christ, so to speak. He engaged in all kinds of, he was a member of the military, he engaged in duels, he engaged in all kinds of things, but then he realized that this was not the way to live and instead became a monk. And as a monk, he urged the monks to somehow become aware of how the people felt, to become aware of the sufferings that people were going through, and to respond to that in ways that they could really understand. And of course, the only solution for this was the whole question of love, the ability of through Christ, coming to the kind of freedom that people wanted with a combination of love. Hell, as he put it, is the place where it's impossible to express or to receive love. These are the teachings of Zosima. And of course, as he does it, he uses many different parts of the Bible in a very lively way, in a way that's very, very close to people's experience. It's clear that Zosima, just as the elder whom Dostoevsky had talked to earlier, that we talked about in the last lecture, knew very well how to appeal to the psychology of people, and he wanted the monks to be able to do this. Furthermore, he tells Alyosha that, look, Alyosha, he said, you cannot remain in the monastery. Alyosha tries to object to this. No, I want to stay here. This is a place where I'm happy. This is a place where I really want to be. He says, no, you have to go out into the world. You have to make it clear to people in the world that a Christian life, a decent life, a moral life is a way that they can live and at the same time achieve both happiness and love and all of those things. As a matter of fact, you have to give an answer to that great unanswered question of the Bible. As you may remember, at the very beginning of the Bible, when Cain, who has of course murdered his brother, is asked by God, "Where is your brother?" Cain replies, "How should I know? I can't constantly keep track of my brother. Am I my brother's keeper?" And of course that question of, am I my brother's keeper? Am I responsible for the sanctity and for the happiness and for the morality and many other things of my brother is one that goes all the way through the Bible. It's always a question. There's never a final answer to this, although Dostoevsky surely thought that the final answer was in Christ. Alyosha has to go out and try to solve that question. Am I really responsible for my brother? Am I really responsible for other people in the world? Is there an imperative for me to help the life of other people? Have we been put in this world, as the Old Testament and the Talmud says, to help one another? Have human beings been put here so that we can help one another, or have we been put here for other reasons? That's the question to which Alyosha is assigned to give a positive answer by going out into the world. Of course, Alyosha is deeply attached to his elder. He sets great store by his teachings. He sets great store by his life, and above all, he believes that the elder will prove to everyone that he was indeed a holy man by dying in what was called sanctity. That is to say, it was perhaps a legend, perhaps a story in the Russian Orthodox Church that when a saint died, his body didn't smell the way other bodies did, but rather gave forth a fragrance. Furthermore, there was great political opposition to the elder in the monastery. There were people led by a character named Father Fierapont who thought that Zosima was a terrible man, a man to be opposed, and of course a man whose position caused great jealousy, not only in Fierapont, but in the people who followed Fierapont. Well, Zosima dies, and of course to Alyosha's deep and total consternation, not only does the body not give off fragrance, but it starts to smell much earlier than most bodies normally smell, and within a few hours the room is almost overpowered with the smell to the extent they even have to open the windows. Alyosha is devastated, and of course Fierapont and his people are exulting. They said, "You see, we told you he wasn't really a holy man. We are the ones to be followed, not Zosima." Alyosha is deeply hurt. So he takes this as a kind of an insult. And of course, you understand the business of stench in Dostoevsky is a very, very important thing. Remember Stinking Lizaveta, remember Smerdyakov, the fact that there were certain parts of the house of Fyodor Pavlovich that always smelled of the cooking of cabbage. And if you've ever smelled that, you know it smells very much like the disintegration of a human corpse. Alyosha is so overwhelmed by this that, as a matter of fact, he decides he'll have to leave the monastery. He can no longer believe in something. He was so looking forward to the sanctity of the death, and it didn't turn out to be sanctity at all. On the contrary, it seemed only to give ammunition to those who opposed Zosima. And so he went out into the world, and of course, ironically, it was the stench of Father Zosima that forced him to follow, that gave the effect that made him follow the advice that Zosima had given him, namely, you must leave the monastery, you must go out into the world. Dostoevsky always proceeds by paradox and by contradiction. And so Alyosha leaves the monastery. His old friend Rakitin, the skeptic, is all too ready to say, "Well, I see at long last your eyes have been opened. Our little saint is no longer our little saint. Listen, have some vodka." And to his amazement, you understand, a monk was not supposed to drink vodka. To Rakitin's amazement, Alyosha says, "Yes, give it to me, I'll drink the vodka." And he says, "Here, have some sausage." A monk wasn't ordinarily supposed to eat sausage. He was supposed to be kind of semi-fasting. Rakitin is amazed. He said, "Well, our little saint has certainly fallen very quickly and very far." And Rakitin remembers that Grushenka, the infernal woman, has promised him a certain amount of money if he can bring Alyosha to her, because she wants to seduce not only the old man, who of course by that time has been murdered, and not only Dmitri, but also all members of the Karamazov family. She has now set her cap to seduce Alyosha. Well, Rakitin says, "Well, in that case, I know there's somebody who would like to see." He said, "Lead on. I'll go to the woman." And so Rakitin brings Alyosha to Grushenka's place, to the place where Grushenka lives. Well, she is ready to devour him whole, for she sets herself forth in front of him in the most seductive fashion, and no sooner does he sit down than she sits on his lap and starts to embrace him. Alyosha, of course, has never before in his life been close to a woman. His body sets to trembling. He's terribly upset. He doesn't know what to do. And Grushenka uses all the tricks of an experienced seductress in embracing him and kissing him, in trying to somehow arouse him. And as she's doing this, and of course Alyosha is in terrible fear and trembling, he doesn't know what to do. All of a sudden, she hears from Rakitin that she says, "Yeah, our little saint, his elder has died." She hears that Zosima has died. And all of a sudden, something gets to her very, very deeply. She jumps off his lap. She jumps off Alyosha's lap. She says, "Good heavens, forgive me. I understand what this means to you. I'm deeply sorry. I deeply apologize for what I've just done." And you realize that Grushenka, too, is suffering from a very deep sense of guilt, and you might say almost a self-loathing. She begins to think, in what way can she appeal to Alyosha as a sister to a brother, rather than as a would-be seducer? And she recalls that once she heard a legend that there was a woman once who, the one decent thing this woman had done in her lifetime was to give an onion to somebody who was almost starving. And when this particular woman who had given the onion died and tried to get to paradise, they said, well, there's only one thing you've done in your life that would enable you to get to paradise. That was the onion. Said, here's an onion. It's hanging from the entranceway to paradise, to heaven. Grab that onion, and if you can hold on to the onion, we'll pull you into paradise. And so she grabs the onion, and they begin to pull her. And of course, when other sinners see that, they try to hold on to her because they too want to be dragged into paradise. And pretty soon she has a whole string of people, and she fears the onion will break. She says, no, get off of me, it's my onion. And she tries to kick them off. And as soon as she tries to kick them off, the onion breaks. And of course, she doesn't get to paradise. And Grushenka says, once in my life, perhaps, I have given that onion. Once in my life, perhaps, I understand that you don't push off other people when they try to share your good fortune, obviously referring to what she's just done to Alyosha. And Alyosha understands this. This appeals to Alyosha in a very deep way. He then returns to the monastery, and here's the protagonists of the people who are on the side of Zosima reading the gospel. And as he hears this, he falls into a slumber, and he has a dream, this time a very good dream, a very sweet dream, about the famous story of Christ at Cana, where Christ performs the miracle of turning the water into wine in time for the wedding celebration. And as Alyosha visualizes this, thanks to the decency of Grushenka, who in a certain sense has given him that onion, sees this beautiful dream, and as he sees the dream, he seems to hear both the voice of Christ and the voice of Zosima, and he somehow recovers his faith. I suppose some people might see this as an overly sweet, as sort of a saccharinely sweet scene. I see it as something that goes very deeply into the feelings of Alyosha, and undoubtedly into the feelings of Dostoevsky. Now, of course, for Alyosha's brother, Dmitri, the relations with women have been far from salutary. There's not only the infernal woman whom I've already mentioned, Grushenka, there's also Katerina Ivanovna, obviously a name that Dostoevsky liked because he used it again in this novel, whom he has insulted in a very, very, very bad way after helping her by covering the debts of her father. Her father had made off with certain money from the military, and Mitya took the money which he had gotten from his father as his inheritance to her so she could pay it back to her father. In the beginning, of course, he had been very good to Katerina Ivanovna, and she had kind of fallen for him. Her passions were directed in his direction, and while she was doing this instead, he veered toward Grushenka. So, of course, there were very jealous feelings between her and Grushenka, and Dostoevsky shows this in the novel in a very, very strong way. Dmitri is tremendously eager to get Grushenka to come with him. And finally, after the murder of his father, where, as a matter of fact, he's been very close to the actual murder at the time, although when we see the murder going on, we never quite see who actually did it. Circumstances are such that all the people around the town believe that it's Dmitri who has killed his father, that Dmitri is a parricide. The fact that all of a sudden he seems to have money, the fact that there was a certain amount of blood on his clothes, the way it was done, the fact that the old man had been waiting for Grushenka and thought that Grushenka was there, all of these circumstances added up to people believing that Dmitri had really killed him, and of course the way it's described, we don't know whether Dmitri has actually killed him or not, although Dmitri was at the place where the murder took place. Now, of course, he's trying to get Grushenka to fall in love with him. He's trying to get Grushenka to marry him, and he learned that she, as a matter of fact, is waiting for a former Polish lover who has come to take her back. And, of course, there's a scene where Dostoevsky, like a Russian of that particular time, makes rather nasty fun of the fellow who's the Polish lover. You get some nuance, some reflection of the dislike that existed at that time between the Russians on one side and the Poles on the other.